Are you interested in learning to master the art of jhana, of meditative absorption? The best way to do that is with the support, encouragement, and challenge of others. Applications are now open for the jhana community, a small community of practice dedicated to mastering the art of jhana. Through January, we're accepting new applications and are hosting 3 separate groups, each focused on a different flavor or doorway to jhana, including Shamatha Jhana with Brian Newman, Metta Jhana with Emily Horn, and Vipassana Jhana with myself, Vince Horn. You're welcome to find out more and apply at jhana.community.
All right, so we're back again for another Our Beloved Teachers. This is a podcast series that started out of Buddhist Geeks that we've been hosting, which is really an invitation to anyone who wants to talk about their beloved teachers who've passed, or talk to someone who trained closely with a beloved teacher who's no longer in corporeal form. And today I'm speaking with Leigh Brasington, who studied with a number of teachers, but today we're going to be focused on his beloved teacher, Ayya Khema. Leigh, thank you for taking the time to speak with Buddhist Geeks.
Oh, great, Vince. It's good to see you again. And yeah, I love talking about Ayya Khema. So happy to do.
And you're a true Buddhist geek. I want to mention your geek credentials. We spent a few minutes before we even started recording this talking about different operating system setups and various other geeky things. So you're a true geek in that sense.
Yeah, I've been doing this a long time. I started programming computers in 1968 on a IBM 1620 that probably has less memory than your watch.
Mm-hmm. Was this a punch card?
It had a card reader and a card punch and a console typewriter, and that was it. No disk drive. 40K of 10-bit RAM, I think it was, something like that. It was weird. And so if you had a big program, you had to run the punch cards through, and it would punch an intermediate deck that you had to run through a second time to get it to punch out your program that now you can run. Of course, if you had a mistake, you had to do all that over.
Wow. Certainly just established your geek credentials. I don't think anyone's going to question those.
Yeah. And I wrote I wrote assembler, COBOL, and C++ for 35 plus years. And they gave me money for doing it, which is, that was kind of nice.
That's great. Yeah, you get to ride the wave.
Yeah.
Like with Buddhism, I mean, presuming to America, putting around as a time frame where there's sort of around the 60s, suddenly comes a big wave, and you rode that wave as well. I'm curious if you could talk about that. Like, how did you get into Buddhism, and where did you first meet Ayya Khema?
Yeah, I was a little later. I didn't get into Buddhism till 85. I actually did get an introduction to Buddhist practice when I was in college. My freshman year, every year, the Phi Beta Kappa fraternity invited people to come and give a seminar for like a weekend. My freshman year in college, the Phi Beta Kappa fraternity invited Houston Smith to come and give a series of lectures. And one of his lectures was about his time in a Zen monastery. And so I got a slight introduction at that point, but that was it. Then I went to Asia as part of a 3-year trip around the world and encountered the spiritual dimension of life, unlike I'd ever encountered before. But I didn't do anything with it. And so I got back in the early 80s. And then a few years later, one of my friends handed me Trungpa's Shambhala and said, read this book. Okay. So I read the book, and then he said, now you got to meditate. Oh, that's so boring. What did Trungpa tell you? He said, you got to meditate. Okay. So I started sort of trying to meditate, not very good at it. My massage therapist was a student of Ruth Dennison's, and she suggested that I meditate. And so, yeah, I'm trying. And then she said, a few weeks later, there's going to be a retreat down at Ruth's. You should go. The teacher is giving a talk at the San Francisco Zen Center Wednesday night. Go see if you like her. And if so, sign up. So I went, and it was Ayya Khema. I don't remember what she talked about, but I do remember the clarity. And so I signed up and went off to the desert to meditate for 10 days. And I quickly learned that I'd never actually meditated before in my life, at least according to Ayya Khema's understanding of meditation. And it was difficult, but I was very impressed with her. She seemed very knowledgeable. And even though I couldn't follow my breath because that was far too boring, I could do the body scan, which she showed us about 2/3 of the way through the retreat. And that gave me something to do, and I could do that. But I think the thing there were two turning points there. The first was I asked her a question, and I don't remember what the question was, but her response was, "Oh, there's nothing to believe in Buddhism. The Buddha said, Ehipasika, come and see for yourself." And I was like, "Really? Nothing to believe? Okay. I mean, I have a background in science. I'll come and see for myself." The other thing that was so important, she gave a talk on the precepts. And when she got to the 5th precept on intoxicants, she said, "We are confused enough already. We do not need to ingest anything that makes us more confused." And since I was a pothead at that time, stoned like 5 nights a week and had been for 14 years, it was like, oh, yeah, she's right about that. I don't need to be any more confused. So I quit smoking pot just on the spot. I mean, I'd already been not smoking for just retreat, but yeah. So those two made a big difference. The fact that there was nothing to believe. And if I really wanted clarity, I actually had to do the things that would bring me clarity. And so I thought, man, this is good. And so I began to get a bit more serious about both meditation and Buddhism. There was a bookstore within walking distance of where I lived. It was probably 6 blocks away, called the Green Apple on Clement Street in San Francisco. And so I would go over there and go to their used book section and buy Buddhist books there to read. And so that was my background. I would occasionally do like day-long weekend sittings in the Bay Area. And luckily there was a sitting group that started in San Francisco that I went to on a regular basis. And that was really my introduction to Buddhism.
Okay, I've got a couple of questions, follow-up questions for you, Leigh. So one is around the relationship between Ayya Khema and Ruth Dennison, because I've been out to Ruth's place just before she passed. I met her, fortunate to meet her and see that beautiful center. And I know that she was famous, one, for being a student of U Ba Khin's, along with S.N. Goenka, who, of course, the famous Vipassana teacher, and also famous for not being associated with Goenka or that lineage anymore, and teaching things like dance and teaching women and teaching outside the traditional Dharma frame a bit. And then, so I primarily know Ruth in those terms. And I know Ayya Khema also was an important early female teacher. Is that kind of the linkage connection there? Or like what, I don't know, do you know any of the kind of backstory there?
Yeah. And so Ayya Khema was, before she became a nun, a student of Robert Hover. And Robert Hover was a student of U Ba Khin. So they had that in common. They were both U Ba Khin lineage, had studied with U Ba Khin, and Ayya was once removed. So they had that in common, and they were both German. And so they had that in common.
That's right. That's right.
So there was a connection there. But yeah, their teaching styles were very definitely different, with Ruth bringing in all sorts of other things. I did several retreats with Ruth, and she was very helpful, particularly with mindfulness off the cushion. I probably got more from that than anything. So yeah, both of them were significant. But it was a while before I reconnected with Ayya. So it was that first retreat. And then 3 years later, I connected with Ruth and went on a couple of retreats down there with her.
Okay, cool. I find it really interesting that these sort of important pioneering Western female teachers were your kind of earliest important teachers. That's just an interesting note.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have no idea why it happened, but I really liked it. And I really connected with both of them.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you for sharing that. I didn't know the connection between, Hoover and that makes sense. There's a whole Dharma connection there. Okay. The other question that came to mind is I know through you, I know Ayya Khema taught the jhanas because that's been a specialization of yours in terms of teaching and practicing. Was that a specialization at the time that you started practicing with her? Was that something that she taught explicitly? Or is that just one of the things in the larger corpus of things she taught that you learned and later specialized in? I'm curious where that began, that sort of jhana emphasis.
So she was teaching jhanas at that time, but not publicly. In other words, she never gave a talk on the jhanas on that first retreat in 1985. If someone came to an interview and she could see they were getting to access concentration, then she would help them get into the jhanas and go through, but she wasn't giving public talks on it.
Oh, okay.
When I reconnected with her in 1990, she was giving public talks on the jhanas, and she was known as a jhana teacher in the Buddhist circles by 1990. But
Okay.
through her whole career, the jhanas were only part of what she was teaching. It's that people got hooked on the jhana. Is somebody doing jhanas? And this is a jhana teacher. But she taught me so much more than the jhanas. I mean, she was an
Right.
insight teacher. She taught a lot of insight practices, and she was a metta teacher. She had these beautiful metta teachings. And I think of myself as, I'm known as a jhana teacher, but I hopefully am teaching a lot more. I give a lot more talks when I teach a retreat on insight than I do on the jhanas.
This is the downside of specializing, Leigh. Unfortunately, you're only going to ever be known as the jhana guide.
I
I'm just
know.
kidding.
It's like, oh, well, that's what's there. But hey, come on a retreat with me and you'll learn a bunch of other stuff as well.
No, it's true. I remember going on retreat with you and thinking, like, when are we going to get to the jhanas? At least the first couple days. Yeah, it's true. Yeah. Okay, good. Okay, so now you set the stage here. You met I came on retreat. It sounds like it was your first retreat
Yes.
in Southern California desert out at Ruth Dennison's place. And after that, it sounds like you got more serious about your practice. You stopped smoking, which you'd been doing for a long time based on something she said offhand. And you made some major life changes, based on this retreat. I'm curious if you could take us from there on, like, how did your relationship with Ayya Khema develop? Did you see her again, or was it like just on retreat that you were working with her? Curious what that looked like practically.
Yeah. So at the end of the retreat, it was like, she's coming back next year. I'll see her then. But I did continue to practice. It got pretty weak. And then it was like, no, I can't call myself a meditator if I'm only meditating once a month. So I cranked it back up. And then I went on another trip. This one it's gone about a year. Australia, Southeast Asia, China. And while I was in Thailand, I went to Ajahn Buddhadasa's monastery for a 10-day retreat there. And that's when I stumbled into the first jhana. I didn't know what it was. They told me it was PT. Okay. And so now I became a PT junkie. If I meditated and got to PT, it was a good sitting. And if I didn't, well, better luck next time. And so I was even more serious about my practice at that point, because now I was meditating because I wanted to, because of the PT, as opposed to because I knew it was good for me. And it was on a return from that trip that I went and then studied with Ruth Dennison at her place that Christmas, New Year's, and then back again a year later. And I studied with a few other teachers, and I would ask people about the PT, but nobody ever really gave me any information. It was like,
Oh, wow.
These people don't know what you're supposed to do with it. I mean, I had the feeling there's got to be more to it than this, but I wasn't getting anybody really giving me any useful information that I could work with. But eventually, my girlfriend at the time handed me a flyer and she said, "You want to go on retreat? This is a really good teacher." And it was Ayya Khema. And it was like, she really was a good teacher. I should go see her again. So I signed up and went to a 10-day retreat in the Bay Area where I lived. So it wasn't even a commute to Southern California. It was close by. Then went into the first interview and we talked a little bit. I had been in Shanghai on that trip to China, which is where she spent the war years. And so we talked a little bit about Shanghai. And then she said, "Okay, so tell me about your meditation practice." And I said, "Well, I can get to PT." And she said, "Oh, good. That's the first jhana. Here's how you do the second." Somebody knew what was happening and furthermore knew what came next. And that's when she became my teacher or during that retreat. And so I learned jhanas 2, 3, 4, 5 during that 10-day retreat. And by the end of it, I became as my teacher and I knew I would be for her retreat the next year. And so I went home and practiced jhanas 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for a year, not doing any insight practice. I hadn't really done much insight practice at all. I mean, the body scan, but, a little bit with Anicca, but that was about it. A little exploration of what are they talking about with not self, but no deep understanding of any of it. And when I was on the cushion, just trying to get concentrated either with the body scan or once I'd learned PT, get to PT. And then once I learned the jhanas, get the jhana.
Okay, cool. So at that point, you're cycling up through the jhanas. You recognize I came as your teacher. It sounds like she became your teacher because you were learning from her. Is it
Yes.
as simple as that?
It's as simple as that. This woman knew what was going on. And it wasn't just the jhanas. I mean, her Dharma talks were quite enlightening. I mean, she really had a lot of interesting information to impart that was very good. It wasn't changing my practice in that I was doing a lot of insight practice, but I was learning a lot about Buddhism and what the Buddha taught from her teachings. And I began to get more of a sense of it. But I was spending my time on the cushion working on concentration pretty much exclusively.
Okay. Got it. I'm curious too. I just don't know a lot about Ayya Khema's background. You mentioned she spent time in China during the war years. So that presumably is World War II and obviously Germany, World War II. Okay. I'm starting to get some connections there.
Yeah, she was sent on the last Kinder transport, the children sent out of Germany. She was on the last one of those and went to some relatives, I think in Scotland. Her parents escaped to Shanghai.
So I assume her parents were Jewish.
Yeah, she was a Jewish banker in Berlin. So, yeah.
Oh, okay. So that's serious.
Yeah, so she was sent in 1938 to Scotland, and her parents got out before the war broke out. And then she joined them by taking a Japanese freighter from Scotland to Shanghai during the war in 1941 before Pearl Harbor.
Wow.
A perilous journey. They could have been sunk by either side, But when she got to Bombay, she couldn't leave the ship because she was a stateless person. And then she reunited with her parents in Shanghai and really enjoyed Shanghai until the Japanese threw all Westerners in a concentration camp where her father died. And she didn't get out of China until 1949 on the last ship before the communists got to Shanghai. Then she came to California. She was married by then and in LA as a teller at the Bank of America for a while. So
Wow.
she had a very, very amazing life. Her autobiography is I Give You My Life. And it's a great adventure story with these nuggets of Dharma, just, every other page or so. Definitely highly recommended if you want to find out about who she was.
Okay. That's great. Thank you for that reference. So we don't have to redo the entire story here. But when you're saying that, I was getting flashes of Ruth Dennison's story as well. Like it was almost for a second, wow, that was very similar conditions that they found themselves in all the way up to the point of being married in like America and kind of 50s,
Yeah.
60s that time, and just the whole 9 yards. Yeah, that's pretty incredible. And she became a nun at some point, obviously, in the
Yeah.
Theravada tradition. That's unusual as well.
Right. Yeah. She was amazing like that. Excuse me. So she divorced, and her new husband and her son, they, yes, he was an engineer, and he had a posting to Pakistan to work on an engineering project. I've forgotten whether it was an aqueduct or a bridge or something like that. It's in the book. And then when the project was finished, they drove in their Land Rover from Pakistan to England. Okay. They were this used to be the hippie trail back before
Right.
all the troubles in Afghanistan and Iran. But they went through, and then they drove back to India, and that's where she encountered meditation from a Hindu teacher. And then they settled in Queensland, Australia on an organic farm. And she said she practiced the Hindu meditation for several years, but never really felt like it was hers. And then one of her neighbors said, "Would you like to hear a talk by a Buddhist monk?" And so she said yes and went along. And this was Venerable Kantipalo. And she said she knew immediately she was home, that this was the connection. And so she began going on retreats with Kantipalo and eventually assisting him. Taught herself the jhanas during those retreats, which is really amazing.
Like through text, or I wonder how did she do that?
Yes. So she was reading the early translations of the suttas, from the early 1900s, Davids and so forth, and the Visuddhimagga. It was a good translation of the Visuddhimagga made at 57. So she had that. That's what she used to teach herself the jhanas. And
Nice.
then eventually she came home from one retreat, and her son met her at the railway station with a note from her husband that basically said, "You're more interested in this Buddhism than me. I'm out of here." And he left. She was rather upset with that at first, but you had to admit he was probably right. And so she got even more serious about studying meditation and just began spending time in Sri Lanka. And eventually she decided, well, I've done everything I really want to do as a layperson. I think I'll become a nun. And so she got the 10 precept ordination in Sri Lanka, which was all that was available. And then she came back to LA, where her daughter was living near San Diego. So to visit her daughter, and then she went to the Chan Temple, Chinese Zen, in LA, and got full ordination and went back to being a Theravada nun, a fully ordained Theravada nun, like
Way to hack the system.
in 1,000 years. So, yeah, Khema was a force of nature. She wasn't going to let anything stand in her way. I mean, the Theravadans, you can only be 10 precepts. And she's like, nope, I'm going to be fully ordained. And so she went back to Sri Lanka periodically and eventually convinced other 10 precept nuns and lay women to get full ordination. And I understand now there's well over 1,000 fully ordained nuns in Sri Lanka, basically because of what Ayya Khema did.
That's cool. So she seeded really a new wave of kind of people entering monastic vows fully, not just the 10 precepts. That's cool.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So Leigh, bring me back to your journey with Ayya. How did this develop? You got access to the 5th jhana, you're doing the jhanas, but where does it go from here?
Right. So she was back, I guess it was 14 months later, for a 1-week retreat followed by a 1-month retreat, end of June, beginning of July. And that was really good. During the 1-week retreat, I learned jhana 6, 7, 8, but I wasn't very good at 8. And so now I had a month to learn it. And Ayya let me play with the 8 jhanas for, I don't know, about a week or so once we moved to the 1-month retreat. And then I come to an interview and she says, okay, now you have to do insight practice after the jhanas. I didn't want to do insight practice. I was having fun playing with the jhanas. And my response was, oh, it takes me so long to go all the way up and back down. And she said, do them faster. Yeah, yes, ma'am. Oh, and you don't have to come down. Just step out at the highest one and do your insight practice. And she gave me insight practice to do. And Ayya Khema was not someone you wanted to argue with. It was very much like, yes, ma'am, I'll go try out what you told me and see what happens. So, okay, run them up to 8, start doing the insight practice. And I was flooded with insights. It was like in the first 6 years of practice, I'd gotten enough insight equivalent to sitting behind the wheel of a car and you got this lever and you push it up and it blinks on one side and you push it down, it blinks on the other side. I mean, that was the equivalent of the insights I got. After a month of doing insight practice, really 3 weeks of insight practice with Ayya Khema's guidance, I backed the car out of the parking lot, drove around the block. I hadn't been on the freeway yet, but I had had enough insight that I was different and my friends could see I was different when I came back. The key thing was that she taught, for this month-long course, she taught the Samanyapala Sutta, which is the second one in the Nikaya, the fruits of the spiritual life, in great detail. I mean, like 25 talks on this one sutta.
That's
And
cool.
it's a sutta on the gradual training. And by the time she was done, I understood how all the bits and pieces that I had picked up over the previous 6 years fit together. It was like I went into that retreat with a metaphorical envelope full of Post-it notes of all the stuff I'd learned about Buddhism. And I came out of that retreat with all the notes neatly organized into Sila, Samadhi, Panya. Morality, concentration, and wisdom, and how it all fit together. And yeah, that was really, really powerful. So that was the turning point in my career. And it was the depth of insights I was getting doing insight practice post-jhana was mind-blowing.
And practically, when you were doing the post-jhana insight practice, you said you're exiting whatever jhana you're in and then doing the instructions, whatever the insight instructions were. Was that kind of what it looked like?
There really wasn't any step called exiting. So I'd be in the 8th jhana, and the practice that worked the best for me was the arising and passing practice. So I'd be in the 8th jhana, and then I would just open up my senses, keep my eyes closed, but start listening and noticing arising and passing. Maybe there was a smell, notice it arising and passing. There would be body sensations arising and passing. There'd be thoughts arising and passing. And then when I got up after the bell rang, well, there was the passing of sitting and the arising of standing. And, as I'm doing walking meditation, I'm paying attention to arising and passing. And so the arising passing practice is what was really profound. And it took me into the progress of insight. I mean, you get the arising and passing step in the progress of insight there. And that's where the insights really begin to flow.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay. There's at least a couple directions I want to go from here. One is, I guess one is looking at the insight territory and experiences that you're describing here. For you, was there a relationship between the jhana model and map and the insight territory as you began to experience it? Or did they seem like two different tracks or two different things?
Well, they fit together really well. The simile I use today, it's like sharpening a knife. You get your whetstone and you sharpen away, and then you go cut something. Okay. I sharpen my mind with the jhanas, and then I go, well, as the Tibetans say, cut the bonds of ignorance, right? Jhana practice is sharpening Manjushri's sword, which he uses to cut the bonds of ignorance. You still got to go wield the sword. So you put down the sharpening implement and start investigating reality. So let go of the jhana and start doing the insight practice. So it blends really nicely. The jhana is there in the background, but it fades out, but that's okay. Once you're using a knife, you don't need the whetstone anymore. It's going to get dull. All right, sharpen it up again. That was the next meditation period.
Okay, that makes sense, because part of the reason I asked earlier about the experience of the instructions of how to do insight practice from the jhanas, because I remember doing jhana work with one of my teachers, and they taught me how to bless the jhanas by exiting the jhana, but not losing it. So it's sort of like exiting and it's still being out in front of you, the quality of the jhana. And then you take that as your object and investigate the state now that you're not like in it. And I found later, like teaching and practicing, that you could do either way. You could bless the jhana from outside the jhana, or you could best it from inside, like you're describing there. You could see the nature of the state, regardless of whether it felt like you were inside it or outside it, if it was present experience.
Yeah, I mean, what Ayya was teaching and what I find in the suttas when I read it is that, you don't do anything with the jhana. You just start doing the insight practice and the jhana fades out. If it's jhana 8, it's gone with a couple of seconds because it's so fragile.
Right.
If it's jhana 4, the quiet stillness of jhana 4 remains, but there's no focus on the quiet stillness. And the best thing about the jhanas is that it turns down the volume on your selfing. You're not creating a sense of self, and gives you this indistractability. And so when you start doing the insight practice, you're looking at the world from a less egocentric perspective, and you have a mind that's not going to get distracted. And that's why it works so well. And trying to maintain the jhana to me seems like a fruitless waste of your limited bandwidth. Just do the insight practice. You've got a mind that's sharp. Go for it.
Mm-hmm. Would you say there, in some jhana systems, like I've heard you talk about the Pa'ok training that you did in that system. Would you say there are some jhana experiences, like maybe on the kind of harder end of the jhana spectrum, where it might not be possible to do insight unless you have exited the state? This is a sort of a debate about esoteric, high level jhana stuff, but I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, for Pa'ok jhanas, you've got to come out, because when you're in, you're gone. I mean, you've completely absorbed into the nimitta, and there is nothing else in the universe, and there's no passage of time, and there's just the nimitta. So you out for that. There are teachers who teach basically the depth that Khema is teaching and more. And again, I think you would have to come out of what they're teaching, their understanding of the jhanas, to be able to do insight practice. I've taken the Khema jhanas to a much deeper level than I would experience them when I was working with Ayya. And that came as a result of working with Pa'ok, because he would have me basically being in access concentration for 3 or 4 hours. Well, when I triggered the Khema jhanas after I'd done his stuff, they would be so much deeper. And you couldn't do insight practice in the jhana. You're just in the jhana, and you would have to come out to do the insight practice.
Right. But then the same thing applies. If you come out, you've got a mind that's sharp and clear and ready to be used in that way.
Right. Yeah. I would say all of the people who teach jhanas with more concentration than what Khema and I are looking for, you got to come out and use the mind that was just generated, the sharp mind, in order to get your insight practice going.
Okay.
There are teachers like Thanissaro Bhikkhu, Robert Ayya, who was a student of Thanissaro, who definitely teach doing the insight practice sort of in the jhana. But jhana is not my problem. Is it permanent? Okay, that's no big deal for me. I need to look at, what am I hanging on to? It's not anything to do with the jhana. It's the stuff with my off the cushion life. Where am I caught? What am I craving and clinging there? That's what needs to be investigated. And staying in the jhana and trying to investigate what I'm hanging on to, well, it's not visible because I'm in the jhana. So,
it's very subtle at that point, probably. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So this classic, there's a distinction that's been made. I can't remember the first person I saw make this distinction. It was probably The Power of Samadhi, that book by Richard Shankman. Yeah. Where he talked about the difference between sutta jhana, the kind of jhanas that you just see described in the early Buddhist texts, and Visuddhimagga jhana, which is more the jhanas described in the later commentarial texts. I've heard you talk about this and how, in a way, Visuddhimagga jhana is a bunch of dudes sitting out in a monastery for 1,000 years trying to out-meditate each other. And I thought that was hilarious, by the way, that characterization. And people laugh at that every time I share it. But it sounds to me like you're describing something similar here when you make kind of these distinctions. Is that the language you would use, talking about like what Ayya Khema taught you as like a sutta jhana versus kind of what Pa'ak is teaching, more Visuddhimagga?
Yeah. I actually picked up the phrase from Thanissaro Bhikkhu. I was calling them the lay jhanas and the monastic jhanas. And he goes, no. It's sutta versus Visuddhimagga. And I thought, yeah, that's right. What Pa'ak was teaching, was very much sutta jhanas, not anything from the Visuddhimagga. And his understanding of the jhanas is close to what Ayya Khema was teaching, although Ayya Khema was teaching a deeper level of concentration. But other than that, it's pretty similar. And Ayya Khema was teaching, let go of the jhana if you start doing your insight practice.
Yeah. The text you mentioned earlier, I forget the name. I know it as the fruits of the contemplative life or homeless life.
Right. Yeah.
That one I remember the description of moving through the 8 jhanas and then going into Bodha or Nirvana from the 8th jhana, cessation. Is that accurate?
That's not what's found in that text. From that text, there is the 4 jhanas, and then following the 4th jhana, it says, with a mind thus concentrated, clear, sharp, bright, malleable, wieldy, and given to imperturbability, one direction inclines it to knowing and seeing. In other words, to doing insight practice. And what you're to investigate are mind and body. And then it's got the supernormal powers. I think we can toss that. And then it's got the overcoming of the asavas, which is the full awakening. There is a text, it's number 9 in the Digha Nikaya, where you go through the first 7 jhanas, and then you go into Nirodha. And it doesn't talk about the overcoming of the asavas or nibbana as following from that, although it does talk about nibbana as, this is the purpose of the practice and so forth.
Okay. Thanks for clarifying that. I understood that it's fairly rare in the early texts for there to be a direct kind of linkage between jhanas and then directly going into insight practice. I don't know if that's true or not, but
it's not true. There are a lot of places. So on my website, leighb.com, if you click on essays, you'll find something on the gradual training. If you click on that, there's a chart that shows the relationship between the various aspects of the gradual training. And the jhanas appear more than any other part of gradual training. The gradual training shows up in over 30 suttas, but not everything shows up in every one. In fact, no sutta has all the 32 components, or however how many it is. But the jhanas show up more often than anything else, and they're frequently followed by insight practice. So it does occur in the suttas. Yeah, not hundreds of times, but it's there explicitly in multiple places.
Okay, cool. This is why we got you here, to clarify these things for us, Leigh. Okay, I do have a question about the powers. I know this is, and we've gone off the timeline and we're exploring different related things. You made a comment about we can toss that. I'm curious why you say that, because I felt that way for some period of time where I thought discussion of the cities or the psychic powers was weird, and I was allergic to it as a rationalist. But then I realized I was having way too many anomalous experiences myself to discount them anymore. And I found that of the advanced yogis and teachers I was talking to, it was the most interesting topic, but they wouldn't talk about it publicly. Kind of like the way that Ayya Khema sounds like related to the jhanas. It wouldn't really come up unless it was relevant to someone. And then otherwise you don't really talk about it. I wonder if something similar is going on with the powers where, to me, it seems like this is actually really interesting territory.
Yeah, definitely interesting territory. So Ayya Khema, by the time I reconnected with her in 1990, was publicly teaching jhanas. Between the 1 week.
But that was bold at the time.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. She was about the only one doing it. In
Right.
91, between the 1 week course and the 1 month course, we had to move retreat centers. And in between, she gave a talk at the Berkeley Zen Center on the jhanas. I know because I gave her a ride for the talk and then gave her a ride to our new place. And yeah, so she was teaching them publicly. But the supernova, well, all right, there's three major categories. There's the mind-made body and the supernova powers like walking on water, flying through the air. Okay, if you can do that, I want a demo. I don't want a YouTube video that's too easy to fake. If you can walk on water, drop by my house and we'll drive over to the San Francisco Bay and you can show me. If you can fly through the air, fly over to my house and knock on the door and fly around. I mean, all I'm asking is for some proof. I, I, just because it's in an old book, yeah, it doesn't make it so. So for the supernova powers, I want to see what's going on. As for the hearing sounds at a great distance and knowing the minds of others, that's ESP. Whatever ESP is, certainly it's a phenomenon. I mean, it's got a name, and if I say ESP, people know it's extrasensory perception. And so it's something. Science says we can't find it, but yeah, something's going on, whether it's just people being bad at probabilities or picking up subtle cues, we don't know, but it doesn't matter. Whatever it is, it does seem to be enhanced by a concentrated mind.
I was going to say being bad at probabilities means you're good at probabilities though, as well.
Right.
Does that make sense? But go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. So I asked Ayya Khema about this. I said, Ayya, it seems like my very weak ESP ability is enhanced by doing jhanas. And she laughed and she said, yeah, we all noticed this. You know, if you're good at the jhanas, whatever ESP is, whether it's a scientifically valid thing or not, it gets enhanced. So that's the second category. The third category is remembering past lives and seeing beings passing away and re-arising according to their karma. And for that one, well, I think Stephen Batchelor expressed it the best in his book, After Buddhism. And basically what he said is the Buddha is situating a human life between all that has gone on before, even before you're born, that influences who you become, your parents, your grandparents, the culture you live in, all this other stuff. And the fact that what you do will have an effect in a small way on how the universe unfolds afterwards, as opposed to looking at life as a selfish, isolated action is putting you at the nexus of this huge thing. And I think that's what the Buddha was doing. He's in a culture where multiple lifetimes are a big deal. And he's tapping into that to try and get people to, realize there's a lot more going on than just their own selfish interest. And so that's my take on the supernova powers.
Yeah. I hadn't heard that threefold kind of taxonomy of looking at the different kinds of powers. Because it seems to me like the ESP, the second one that you mentioned, is the most obvious and the one that's calling out for the most empirical investigation.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's very interesting. It sounds like that was recognized in your training with Ayya Khema and that community. There was a recognition, like if you do a lot of jhana practice, you're going to notice these kinds of sensitivities. So that's interesting. It was explicit.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm not claiming I have very good ESP powers, but I have had events happen when I was on retreat and practicing a lot of concentration that it was like, well, the easiest explanation, Occam's razor would say there's ESP happening here.
Right.
And it's not anything that's reliable. I can't make it happen. And it just shows up. And occasionally, I can make a determination. I'm going to know something that I wouldn't know. But if I know it's going to happen in the future, then I'm going to know when it's going to happen. And sometimes it would happen right on time. Now, is this probability or, I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Well, of the many great things, unanswered questions, we'll have to leave that one unanswered.
Exactly. And it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter for advancement on the spiritual path. Knowing somebody else's mind is probably not going to help you get rid of greed and hatred and delusion. You need to know your own mind.
I guess insofar as others' minds are like your mind, we can learn something. ourselves through others. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
mostly useful to help others.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for sharing a little bit on the supernormal powers. Now, I know we're running out of time here. There's still a lot more to explore with your time. So after this longer retreat, this 5 weeks or so, felt like you were able to get the car out and drive around, start to understand a bit about the insight territory. How did your training with Khema develop from there now that you had your own sense of mobility?
Yeah. So she was back again a year later for a month-long retreat, and she taught on independent origination in that retreat. So that helped a lot to really get a sense of what was going on in a much deeper level. And she was looking basically at Nikaya number 50, the great discourse on origination or causation. And so, and that one starts with dukkha and works backwards. And that's the way to approach dependent origination. And once she put that out there and I saw it, that made a huge difference in my understanding. I'd had it taught to me by multiple people, including Ayya. And so I had a little bit of an idea of the 12 links, but that made a really big difference. Look back as to what this is arising, dependent on, as opposed to looking for causes. Then Ayya Khema had breast cancer surgery. And so 93, she didn't come to the States. She was busy recovering from the surgery, which was really hard on her. When she showed up in 94, there was going to be a 24-day retreat and down in Santa Cruz. So I get down there and the registrar says, "Oh yeah, when you get here, Khema wants to see you right away." I was like, "Oh, my teacher wants to see me." And, so I go in and she's like, "Oh, good. You're going to be doing interviews." "What? I don't know how to do interviews." She said, "You'll learn." But she said, "Look, I don't have the energy I used to have. You're going to have to help. You're going to help. Yeah, the Bodhi's going to help. Some person's going to help. We'll do it together." And again, it was a 1-week retreat followed by this time a 17-day retreat. So she put me to work doing interviews. And in the evenings, the three of us would go to where she stayed and we would go through the interviews. I saw so-and-so and they said this, and I said, and I would, critique it and say, "You could have said," and, "Oh, that's good," etc. And
Nice.
then when the 1 week was over, Jnana Bodhi, her Dharma heir, eventually, he took the next 17 days as a retreat because he'd been busy assisting Ayya and he hadn't had a retreat in a while. And the other person was the retreat manager and she was busy. So it was just Ayya and I for the about 20 students remaining. And so, yeah, I would go to Ayya's room each evening after the evening program and discuss the interviews with her and other topics. And that was so great. And that's basically how she taught me to be a teacher. And then when she was back in 96, she said, "Look, if somebody really wants to see me, I'll see them. But otherwise, you and Kay, another advanced student of hers, do all the interviews." And so we did. And again, we'd go talk with Ayya after the interviews in the evening. And yeah, she was basically training me to be a retreat teacher. And then the last time I saw her was 3 weeks before she died. She had phoned me in July and asked me to call her back the next day. This is back in the answer machine days. So I called her back the next day and she says, "I'm too ill to teach the retreat Gaia House in October, I think it was. Can you teach it?" And I'm like, "What?" I mean, my teacher is now too ill to teach. Her cancer had returned. And I'm like stunned. And she could tell. And she said, "Well, think about it overnight and call me back tomorrow." And I called her back. "Of course, I'll teach the retreat." Well, I had only taught one other retreat at that point. And so I go to Gaia House and teach that retreat. Oh, first I went to visit Ayya and visited her. She was in the hospital and not doing real well, but she never complained. You could see when she moved, it was painful, the grimace on her face and so forth, but she never complained. And all she wanted to talk about was the Dharma and how I should go about teaching it. She gave me some
Mm.
really good advice. I think the best was don't get involved in Dharma politics. And I said, that was excellent.
That's a challenge.
Yes. Well, just keeping that in mind, it's been possible, much more possible since she had given me the advice. And
Yeah.
then the other advice was don't get involved in running a Dharma center or lead up too much of your time. Spend your time teaching and practicing. And that's also been very good advice.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much what I've been trying to do.
Interesting. So in a way, like it sounds like she was recommending being a bit of like a freelance teacher in a way, not getting too caught up in the politics and the organization and institution building stuff.
Right. Exactly. Which, yeah, that's what I've been doing. When I was a kid, I would watch ABC's Wide World of Sports, and they would have track meets. And this guy's running from this club, and this guy's running from this club, and this guy is unattached. And I'm teaching unattached, which
There you go.
is a nice crime. But yeah, I'm not beholden to any center or anything like that. And because I'm teaching jhanas, there's so much demand out there for jhana teaching and so few people doing it. That, yeah, no problem with me having more retreats to teach than I can do.
Nice.
But yeah,
That's cool.
Ayya Khema
Sounds cool.
was probably the most amazing person I ever met. In the Reader's Digest, they used to have my most unforgettable character. It was this ongoing series where people would tell you, well, Ayya Khema was my most unforgettable character. For some people, they say, when that person was created, they broke the mold. Well, Ayya Khema, there was no mold. She was hand carved.
I love that. I love that, Leigh. Thank you so much. That's a great note to end on. If you want to end here, I know we're at time, but if there's anything else you want to share, your time with ICAM or anything that comes to mind, would love to hear it too.
Yeah. The only other thing I could say was she was a force of nature. I mean, we didn't even talk about the fact that she basically revived the Theravadan fully ordained nun Sangha. And she organized conferences for women, got the Dalai Lama to come and speak at those conferences as a keynote speaker. Just a really amazing amount of stuff that she did, as well as being an absolutely brilliant teacher. She was your favorite Jewish grandmother, and she was also very, very German. She did these very beautiful metta meditations. There's a bunch of transcripts and recordings on my website if people want to check it out. And yet she was very hard-nosed, and you would do it her way or else, and people, if you had trouble with authority figures, maybe Ayya Khema wasn't a good teacher for you, because when you went on her retreat, she was the authority figure. It was going to go best if you would go, yes, ma'am, I'll go try that out right away and get back to you, because that's what worked.
And that's not your vibe as a teacher. I haven't found you to be like that particularly.
Yeah, well, look who taught me. She said that the reason I did so well was because I followed instructions. And yeah, it's like, if the instructions are good, follow the instructions as opposed to trying to figure it out on your own.
Love that. She did all of that you described also while coming to it late in life. It wasn't like she was born into this, like the Dalai Lama or Thich Nhat Hanh or someone. She came into it later in life and did a tremendous amount in the Dharma world.
Yeah. She started meditating at age 36, which is how old I was when I started meditating. And she just, the first 6 years while she was doing the Hindu meditation, she persisted. And then when she got the Buddhist meditation, she just really took off. But yeah, really, really amazing person. And I highly recommend her autobiography, I Give You My Life. I mean, it's a fun read because she had such an amazing life. When I was first reading it, I was 50 years old. And I get to the point where she's the same age as I am. And I go, I would have led a boring life. I mean, I've been around the world twice by then. And compared to Ayya, it was nothing. And she hadn't even really started teaching at that point. I mean, all the great stuff. So yeah, totally amazing.
Thank you so much for share your reflections here with us and for whoever listens to them in the future.
Yeah. She was someone that was so impressive that if you connected with her, you wanted to share. I had this amazing experience with this person. That's who she was.
After nearly a year in private beta, the Buddhist Geeks Network is now open for any independent practitioners who want to engage in interdependent practice. You can find out more about the Buddhist Geeks Network by visiting buddhistgeeks.network. And if you'd like to join the community and join us in regular social meditation practice or other events that we host there in the network, all freely offered, you're very welcome to do so, again, by visiting buddhistgeeks.network. Love to see you there.